Hello, 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 everyone. It is Thursday. It is yet again time for another Ask Christian Shield session. I am so glad to have you all here with us today. So, check this out. My name is Christian Shields. I am the founder of My Secret's Purpose and the creator of the My Secret's Purpose conference. And I host these Ask Christian sessions to help normalize conversations within our own homes. I am also a mental health professional, and today I am so excited to invite our guest into the conversation today. But before then, let's go over last week's Ask Christian Shield session. Last week's session, we brought in Maria Owens, where we talked about business practices and relationships and things that women just don't know to do to protect themselves. So if you have not checked that episode out, be sure to look for it up and down the timeline so that you can hear and learn more about ways to protect yourself. Today, we are going to have Miss Keana with us today, and I'm so excited to have her. But before I introduce her, let me tell you all a little bit about her. She is a mental health counselor, speaker, and life coach whose areas of specialty are trauma, domestic violence, and sexual violence. She owns a solo coaching business called The Queen Guide, which teaches women of color how to stop being silent about their mental and emotional pain in order to begin healing their lives. In the past 10 years, she has lived and worked in Nashville, Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee, and St. Louis. She has 8 years of experience working in the mental health field and has worked with hundreds of clients in varying capacities. Kiana is passionate in mental health and strives to reduce the barriers attached to people of color utilizing mental health services. So, can you all help me welcome on Miss Kiana today? Hello.
Happy
Hello.
Thursday.
Happy Thursday and welcome to the Ask Christian Shield session. And so, what I want to do is go ahead and give you an opportunity to I introduced you, but
Yeah.
I know there are some things as a mental health professional that we have to kind of disclaim first before the conversation begins. So, go right ahead.
Yes. So as Christian mentioned, for my bio, that's my background as far as like my training and my experience. Now, even though today we'll be talking about mental health related topics, and I am a mental health professional, we won't be going too much into processing of any kind of trauma or any situation in particular. It'll mostly be psychoeducation. So information on trauma and information on how you can seek the help that you need to process your trauma if that's something that you need. So I just want to give a disclaimer. Also, be mindful in the comments. I'm a mandated reporter, and I'm pretty sure Christian is also. Like, I don't want to speak for her, but I'm pretty sure she is. We're both mandated reporters. So if in the comment section anyone discloses anything that is kind of indicative of or like explicitly stating that they're a threat to themselves from someone else, so homicidal or suicidal, or if they disclose any type of abuse, particularly though elder abuse or child abuse, so any vulnerable population that is being abused or has been that they know of, we would be responsible for making sure we report that. So just be mindful of what you're putting in the comments, because this is a public forum, and it does get a little complicated in that we are mental health providers, not necessarily providing a mental health service right now, but we are still held to the ethical obligation of being mandated reporters. So if we do know about something happening, abuse or safety wise, we would have to handle that. So just FYI.
Awesome. Thank you so much for giving a disclaimer to all of our viewers today. Again, welcome, welcome, welcome. I welcome you. So, this whole conversation about trauma, I felt was very good to bring up, to approach it from the group perspective, which makes us able to have this conversation live today.
Yes.
Because with so many different issues taking place in the world today, I also want to make sure that we understand that we are adding new issues to the pre-existing issues. And so I want to make sure that we are helping people identify some traumatic areas in their lives, and to help them understand if they are experiencing complex trauma, and kind of giving them some ways that they could seek some help or begin their healing themselves. So to kick us off, can you go ahead and kind of just describe trauma to us? What is this thing called trauma?
Yes. So it can get very complicated, but the simplest definition I like to use is any like situation or event that made you feel unsafe. And this includes emotionally unsafe or physically unsafe, psychologically also, because sometimes we confuse psychological and emotional. Um, well, our side, look, oh my God, get my words together. Our
Guys,
psychological states, there we go, and our emotional states, sometimes we often confuse them, but they are separate. So anything that makes you feel psychologically, emotionally, or physically unsafe is technically considered a trauma. Now, definitely, the degree to how unsafe you feel is going to determine like how, I guess, big of a trauma that is, because even in the trauma world, we kind of distinguish what we call small T traumas from big T traumas. Small T traumas being things like I moved away, I had to start a new school, because those are things that can be traumatic. But we separate those from like the bigger things, like I witnessed someone get hurt or someone die, or something, a situation that almost put me in a situation that almost put me um, in a mental health state or physical health state that could have resulted in death or serious injury, or did. So that's the most simple version of it. Anything that threatens your psychological, emotional, or physical state.
so with that being said, there being small traumas and big traumas, right? I kind of want to talk about the difference between the two. And I'm asking that because, and can you use some specific examples? So,
Oh, sure.
um, and then I'll get to the next part.
Okay. So I want to use a lot of examples from working with domestic violence clients, because honestly, this is where I see it show up the most. But to be fair, a lot of my work has been working with survivors of domestic violence. Now, I have worked in community mental health, so I've had other like client populations, but I feel like psychological abuse often shows up, unfortunately, with people that have experienced domestic violence. So psychological abuse or trauma can look like a situation happening. You may be stating your emotions regarding the situation or your account of the situation, and then another person kind of saying, "Well, like, no, that didn't happen," or like, "You're not remembering it correctly," or "Your thoughts or emotions aren't valid." This can be in subtle ways or in not so subtle ways. But what that does is kind of makes us feel like, one, we can't trust our memories, and that's a problem if you can't trust your thoughts or your memories. But then it eventually can get to a point where you stop even sharing those things, and that can be even more dangerous, especially when you start talking about like traumas happening and no one knowing about it, or it not or it going unreported, or people not getting the help that they need because they feel like, oh well, it's not important anyway, so why even bother, or why risk the disappointment of sharing it. Whereas emotional trauma can be, sometimes there's an overlap, but emotional trauma can be more like verbal abuse, name calling. That's a big one, especially like name calling. Um, those are the two like most common ones that I see, and the ones that are easiest to understand. So I'll stop there.
We have
But
so
yeah,
much.
if you want to know, definitely ask me more questions. But yeah.
So when it comes to that, I think you highlighted something that is very seriously overlooked within our community. And that part is how much we silence the voices of those who actually need help. I see it a lot where we have built such a level of resiliency against whatever we are facing or doing, that it has put us in a position to not actually see asking for help as something that can help provide a strength to their situation or strengthen the individual in the situation. So can you talk a little bit around that part of resiliency?
Yes. So resiliency is multifaceted because it's kind of. Oh, one moment. Can you still hear me? I don't know why
I
my.
can
Oh,
see, I
okay.
can hear
Look,
you, and I
I
can
guess
see
I
you.
haven't been like touching my computer enough, so my screensaver came up. I'm like, oh my god, I know my charger working. Okay, so sorry about that. So resiliency is like this abstract concept, but we know what it means in terms of like, just on a very basic level, like having the skills to be able to, or cultivating them, because sometimes we don't have them, but we have to figure it out in the moment, or cultivating the skills to deal with a situation that requires like us adjusting to it. Because a lot of times trauma can seriously damage or completely obliterate our previous like thoughts or beliefs about people, situations in the world, and so it becomes very necessary, literally for survival. Even if it's just like surviving mentally a situation, it becomes very important to understand how to then move forward in life, even though your recent beliefs don't may not be as valid anymore or may completely just not be true for you anymore. And so I think your question was what does resiliency
Yeah,
look
we can talk about what that looks like, because what I tend to see is a lot of I've literally have spoken in groups and people are like, well, I grew up and they were like, toughen it up, um, gotta fix that. We don't have to talk about that. And there's a lot of conversation of just like minimizing what happened to a person.
like?
Um, and I kind of want to address that, because that
Okay.
makes it difficult for them to actually process what happened and to help strengthen that individual and to change that mindset, because it's been embedded for so
Yeah.
long.
And thank you for clarifying it. Because like I said, resiliency is like a huge concept, and for me, that's more like almost the opposite of, just because by definition it technically is adjusting to
Hmm.
the situation, but it's usually those are usually the more unhealthy ways. Because that's usually more, hey, just get over it, which unfortunately a lot of people, like you said, that's kind of what we're raised to do. Like, well, it's over now, just stop talking about it, don't think about it, or there's nothing you can do, so why even bother? Like you said, toughen up, don't cry, like all these things that are technically like resiliency in terms of like moving through a situation or adjusting to a reality that is no longer like what you thought it was or what it was or what felt safe. But
Hmm.
it's usually that's usually in a way that's like unhealthy, or what we call in the counseling world like maladaptive. So you haven't accurately, or not accurately, but you haven't efficiently or effectively adjusted to the situation in a way that will kind of either restore that safety that you felt like you lost, or kind of help rebuild it if it can't be like completely restored.
That
Um,
that makes a lot of sense. And I'm glad that you brought up the terminology of maladaptive. So, like, if people hear that term, we as mental health professionals are not saying that what you did is bad and you've been handling a wrong way. It's just how we are communicating, what you have put in place to help support your own life.
yeah.
And that's how we speak to each other as professionals. So we're not taking away from you. We are just trying to understand you. The other part about trauma is, what does trauma impact look like? And when you say that, I want you to like be very descriptive,
Okay.
because uh, people live with it and they don't know that they live with it, and I know that it has a domino effect.
Hmm.
But what does trauma impact look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because in a general sense, there are some things that, like, if you look at the DSM or if you look like what is the impact of trauma, there will be some very generic things. But what I have learned is that it looks different on each person. And like being a mental health professional, we know what I call the categories of like the impact of trauma. So when clients are telling their stories, like I know how to like categorize it or put it in those boxes, but it
Mhm.
doesn't always look like that. So an example of that would be people who are like, oh, I'm just antisocial, like I just like to be alone. But then if you dig deeper and you're like, okay, well, what does that look like? Do you have friends? Do you hang out with your friends? How much time outside of like your what you consider to be your safe spaces do you spend? So if that's like, oh well, I just go to work and come home, like that's not very healthy. Um, or like I don't really hang around people. I don't really do too much because I feel more comfortable at home. And it's like I know from research that humans are biologically and neurologically hardwired for social connection, which means like we don't really do well on our own. Now, of course, introverts, there are times where it's like, okay, I had enough social connection, like I need to go, be alone for a little while. But
Yeah,
then even that is time limited and it's not pervasive in that, like, in all areas of my life, I just kind of stay to myself in the corner. Like, that's not even introversion. Introversion is more so like how you get your energy, but we kind of mix those two up. Those two up. People just be like, oh, I'm an introvert. It's like, no, you're socially isolating to an extreme, and that's problematic.
yeah,
So that's one that I see often. People just kind of like, oh, I'm alone. I say to myself, which
yeah,
for some people that is true, but again, it's always going to be the degree to which you do it, and then your reasoning or motivation behind it. Because a lot of people have social anxiety because of their trauma, and they don't realize it, or they just don't trust people in general, or they don't know how to like decide who's trustworthy or not, so they just stay away from everybody, which works, but it's not healthy. Another thing is being activated very easily. So, or people are like, oh, I can go to 0 to 100. Again, there are some people that, like, neurologically, they are just more sensitive to stimuli. Other people, it's like that's not their natural personality. But after trauma, like, that's something that they like recognize about themselves,
hmm,
which kind of goes hand in hand with the next one, which is what in the counseling world we call hypervigilance, which is really just being like super aware or hyper aware. So those people, they're always like looking over their shoulder every 10 minutes, like paranoid about, okay, what's happening, what's about to happen. Am I safe? Like, if something popped off, like, could I be safe? Like, what do I need to do? Things that seem very normal, again, unfortunately, if you live in certain neighborhoods or if you feel like that's just the norm for you, it isn't always. And it's usually a result of trauma. But it's things that we think of as not being a big deal or we attribute to other things.
I think that is a great place to now kind of talk around. Wait, I don't want to jump too fast because you
Oh, no,
just
no,
went
you're
a
fine. Yeah.
whole lot about like the need and desire for the human connection, how we thrive and need that. And then the other part you talked about the difference between someone who is an introvert or someone who is just socially isolating as a reaction to the trauma that they have faced. So, with that being said, what are some of the most important lessons that you learned about people that are social isolating as a reaction to trauma? What are some of those?
Yeah. So a lot of times on the surface, like I mentioned, it would just look like, oh, I just stay to myself. I just go to work, come home. I just do, whatever, insert like actually required duties, and then I go home, or I just do whatever. Um, a lot of times or their trauma responses, they're unique to them, show up in things like a lot of failed relationships. And if you ask why, it's like, oh, well, when things, and they can't always say like, oh, when things get hard, I just run. But when you listen to their stories, it's like, oh, every time something gets challenging or too hard, you just run away. Like you don't ever face it. You don't come back to it. In counseling, the agency I work for, we do a lot of DBT informed like treatment. In our group, we have DBT groups, and so we talk about like making repairs, which
Mhm.
is like after you have a falling out with somebody or some kind of transgression against a person or a situation that is unfavorable, like how do you come back and reconcile that situation? What I've learned is people that are like take social not social distance take social isolation to the extreme, social distance too, but people that take social isolation to the extreme, usually it's because like they don't know how to like engage in relationships, or if something happens or if somebody does something that upsets them, they don't know how to, one, have that conversation, but then two, they don't know how to like repair the situation or ask for a repair, because sometimes it's not their place to repair something, especially if somebody else broke it. But you can say like, hey, I didn't appreciate that. Um, and I really would prefer that you not do that again, and or like make it up to me by XYZ. Um, Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, I think you shared some good points. Um, I kind of want to highlight the part about asking for a repair and like how do you know if it is your turn to ask for a repair or if it is the other person's turn to ask for it, because what I tend to see is that people who are living with trauma and reacting to trauma, they tend to blame themselves for what happened,
Yeah.
and it's very hard for them to kind of identify which decision or whose turn it is. And so, could you provide like a baseline of something they could ask themselves to kind of help answer that question?
Yes. So first question I would ask is like, or recommend that person ask themselves is like, do I have clarity of the situation? Like, what can I verbally say? Like, exactly what happened and exactly what went wrong? Because a lot of times, like you said, if we're just emotionally reactive, like emotions aren't logical. That's by like design. It's okay that they aren't, but understanding that helps us recognize it. Like, oh, I may have been emotional about something and then jump to a conclusion and responded to that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that because I had a feeling or felt some type of way that my response or even my reaction was appropriate, or like just like worth doing it all. Um, so I would say first of all, like, do you even like can you even verbalize like what happened, what went wrong? And then if you do know, like, yes, she said this, it made me mad, and so I did X, Y, Z. If you can do that, or once you can do that, then kind of really think about like, okay, what role did I play? What role did they play? Was there anything that could have been done differently? Because sometimes the answer is no. Actually, a lot of times the answer is like, no, I mean, just knowing what I knew at the time, that was the only, that was the next best step that felt like the right thing at the time.
Yeah.
So sometimes looking back, you'll have insights that you didn't have in the moment, which is normal. So recognizing like sometimes there wasn't anything differently you can do, but looking at it from the position that you are now, do you see something that you could have done differently? And if the answer is yes, then like kind of take responsibility for that and like, okay, I'm willing to apologize for jumping to conclusions. But I'm not willing to apologize for this person saying this thing to me or this person, responding in this way or having this behavior. So it does become like a very high level process that has to happen. And there are a lot of times people that experience trauma just don't have the emotional or psychological capacity to, or just don't have the energy to. But I think it's very necessary because, like you said, like really figuring out how can I take a like systematic approach to making sure this doesn't happen in the future, or just like minimizing the damage. So I would say start with that, trying to figure out clarity. So like what happened, what went wrong, what part did I play, what part did the other person play? Could anything have been done differently? If so, like really take that seriously and make a repair if necessary. If not, just keep it in your mental bank for future reference.
You are helping us today. You are helping
I'm
us.
trying. I'm trying. Let me know if it. Let me know if
And
it's
you
something else.
are. You are. And I think I like how you said put it in your bank for later. And it is a high level processing component that comes with that. And with that, it also comes with a lot of limiting beliefs. So let's say a time comes where you are ready to pull it out and you think you and that other person are ready to have that conversation. Can you talk around what limiting beliefs that those that are ready to have that conversation may need to look out for or get rid of before that conversation?
Ooh, that's a very good question. Because I honestly believe like when it comes to conflict, a lot of conflict doesn't get resolved because people like kind of assume that the conflict can't be fixed before they even try. So one thing in particular, a limited belief that I see a lot is like this person, like it's not going to make a difference. Like me saying what I have to say, or asking to have discussion, it won't make a difference. That could be true depending on the person that you're dealing with. Because I mean, a lot of times we know who we're dealing with, but also it's just that we have never given them the opportunity, or we never tried, so we don't really know. But we just assume that we won't. So I think letting go of the limited belief that like me saying something about how I feel or how I felt about a situation and wanting to have that conversation won't be taken seriously. Because we just don't know until we try it. I'm trying to think. That's the biggest one that I think happens often. Let me think about this.
Someone might be saying, I tried though, and
Ooh, that's a good one. I didn't even think about that. Yes. Okay. So I tried, but it's like, did you really know? Like, or to be fair, in what way did you try? Like, trying. What does trying mean to you? Because what trying mean to me and what trying
that,
mean to you isn't always the same thing.
ooh,
Um,
that
yeah,
is
especially for people that tend to have like a passive aggressive communication style.
mm,
I'm a pretty direct communicator, so sometimes I don't always catch passive aggression. Other times I notice it and I purposely won't respond to it, or I purposely respond in a way that makes that person have to be assertive in their communication. So yeah, it's like, did you really try? Or like when you try and it didn't work, did you try something else or did you just give up? Because like sometimes that's it too. Like, oh well, I tried to do this one little thing, but when it didn't work, I just gave up. It's like, no, that's not how that works.
you said something great. Like, what does trying look like to you? Like, define it. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very good because something that I notice a lot is people are fixers. Like, they are natural fixers. They don't want to have to sit with whatever emotion that came with the situation. They don't want to they don't want it to fester too long. So you have some people that jump right in and want to fix, but is there something that we have to know and understand about the difference between trying to address the situation and trying to fix it, where that is like a one person trying to answer for everyone type of ordeal?
Yes. And one of my friends and I had this conversation or not all the time, but like often in that, like sometimes having those conversations to fix a situation, or not fix, but to repair a situation. I like that word, but repair a situation. Sometimes it's a process. Like she always reminds me, like, oh, this may not be one conversation, or this may take more time than just like you addressing it and getting the answer. And so sometimes that looks like fixing can look like, oh well, we just about to have a conversation, and then it'll be solved, like the problem will be solved. And it's like one, a lot of times it's not realistic. Um, and sometimes in the situations where it is realistic, it may not be the best option because sometimes there's more gray to the situation than we're acknowledging. So like just trying to get to a quick fix won't be helpful. And I've noticed this a lot too. If we're focused on fixing, that's also getting to a quick answer. That could be something that's like, oh, well, we fell out about something that was actually important, but because I want to fix the situation, I'm just gonna say like, oh, sorry, so that we can start talking again and then move forward. But it's like, but we never address the actual problem, which means it's gonna come up again, which means that like the problem isn't really solved. Just like that immediate discomfort is solved, which is so I would think like actually processing through that, or the next step would be like actually taking a look at the problem and working through it from a process perspective more so than just like let's hurry up and get to a solution.
So would you kind of agree that there is a lot of change in like thinking processes that come with trying to repair situations and trying to work through the trauma that you have experienced?
Oh, definitely, yeah, definitely.
I
So trauma, unfortunately, it take like depending on how much trauma you had and how severe it was, it can literally change the way that your brain functions. So one, your brain can stop functioning at what was your baseline. So what was normal for you, it won't do that anymore, or you have the capacity to not be able to like operate at that level anymore, or at least for the time being. Like you can, there are things you can do to repair that, but not be able to operate at that level for the time being. Or if it's like multiple traumas over time, and unfortunately during like the critical developmental stages, sometimes they can create like actual structural like damage or structural changes in the brain. So yeah, that's very important to know, because obviously that's going to impact one how you perceive what's happening, but then also how you process what's happening and are able to think through like what's doing it. Because trauma or being in a trauma puts you in more of like a fight or flight response than the actual like problem solving or helpful problem solving like mode. So
Yeah. And I think that's a good point that you just made about flight. It's flight, freeze, and what's the last one? My brain is
fight, flight, freeze.
okay. Those are three.
Okay, yeah.
And then I think it was one more that was on the table that will be added at a later
What's
time.
the one that it's talked about a lot called the find response, and it's usually, at least in my workplace, we talk about it a lot, or one of my coworkers talks about it a lot in response to like sexual trauma or domestic violence, because it's the response that's like, let me like flatter this person or try to be like, oh, like, everything's fine, or just like engage them in a seemingly positive way, but the intent is to kind of keep them satisfied so that they don't lash out. But that's like a whole nother.
Another thing.
Yeah, but yeah, that's the one that is, at least that I know of, that's like
Mhm.
sometimes on the table, often not, but is
Yeah,
very.
that's the one that I was referencing.
Okay.
And so, like, I think we didn't talk that much about the sexual trauma, but I kind of want to highlight on that because what I tend to see when people have experienced sexual trauma, you tend to see people be more, I hate to say the word promiscuous, or you tend to see them be more like locked outside of themselves, and some of their activities could be more riskier than others. And so, can you kind of talk a little bit around sexual trauma? Because I know in our community that that is overlooked a lot.
So.
Um, so, lay it on us because I know you got a mouthful.
So I mean, unfortunately, this is not a topic that you want to be like, oh yeah, I know a lot about that. Let's talk about it. But it like you said, it's very necessary.
Yeah.
So for some reason, I don't know why, but I feel like in Memphis, I had the most clients that like were either, maybe they were just at the place where they were ready to talk about it, but
Mhm.
that had the most instances of like having situations of being sexually abused, parent knowing and just completely just not paying any attention to it, or being like, oh, it was your fault, or just acting like it didn't happen. And unfortunately, what people don't realize is, particularly when we talk about childhood and adolescent sexual abuse, it's usually somebody that you know. It's usually somebody that lives in the house. It's usually somebody that has a lot of access to the house, or so like family or friends who are over a lot, or at least close enough to the family where like that child or that adolescent can be around that person. So unfortunately, like you said, us not talking about it is very problematic because it's what perpetuates the abuse. The person knows that, like, oh, because I am so close to the person that I'm abusing, like, one, people won't really respect or expect it, and then even if they do, there's like some safety plan that the abuser or perpetuator has to do in regards to like safety planning for like, oh, what if this person tells, or what if somebody finds out? So a lot of times, like, they're grooming their victim of like, don't tell or else. Um, and so unfortunately, that looks like people not speaking out about their trauma. But what I've noticed is that a lot of times, like you said, what one of the trauma responses, particularly for sexual abuse, is hypersexuality or risky sexual behavior. And I kind of put two and two together from my work working with, because I learned about and was working with survivors of domestic violence before I started learning about sexual violence, even though there is a lot of overlap, but they're really, in my opinion, two separate specialties. But what
Mhm.
I learned is like it's always all about power and control. The reason that people abuse is power and control. They want power, they want control. Obviously in an unhealthy way, but it comes down to that. And I think the same happens when victims or survivors are trying to like reclaim their power and control of their life, their body, their emotions, and mental states. And I think with the risky sexual behavior or hypersexuality, that's exactly what it is. So if it's like I'm only used to a person like taking advantage of me sexually or like not letting me have control or autonomy over my body, then when I have the chance to, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it like in every way that I feel comfortable with, or honestly in every way that makes me feel powerful. Because let's not like underestimate the power of like sex. And so a lot of people know that whether they know it unconsciously or like consciously, like sex is very powerful. Um, and even a lot of times, people that sexually abuse, it's not even about the sex. Again, it's about the power and control. You know how much power you can take from a person by sexually abusing them. So yeah.
Yeah. I think that
I was like, that's the PG, but not very PG version.
I appreciate you touching on that in itself because even as I'm over here and I'm listening, I can automatically go to experiences in my mind are connected with certain behaviors or attitudes because I do notice, like you mentioned, like it is usually someone that is close to you, and a lot of times um, it shows up in some of their behavior, but we tend to minimize it because of who that person is and what that connection is. But I also know within our community, it's always that part of if I say something, will that person believe me? Like, will this person who I deem is safe, a mother or father, will they believe me? And I also know that it's not just something that men do. I also know that men do it. I also know that children do it.
Mhm.
I also know that women do it. So it's not something that is just pinned to a certain gender.
And
Um,
I do want to add to that because that is so, and I'll try to make it quick because I don't want to mess up your train of thought.
there
But
you go.
that is very important to talk about if we're going to like have that conversation. So one, I know way too many men that have been sexually abused as children. Like, and I guess because we only talk about girls being victims, like we don't talk about boys enough. But I know way too many men that have like sexual abuse histories, and it was like in their childhood, not even like as I mean as adults also, but like mainly in childhood, and child on child, which is also one that we don't talk about. And that one to me is the most like not scary, but the most like unsettling because a lot of times, so going back to hypersexuality or I forgot the other word I was using, risky sexual behavior. But with kids, it's more like hypersexuality. A lot of times, that's because they've even either seen it on TV. Unfortunately, the internet, like porn, is so accessible, or like just like sexual material or graphics is so accessible that like it's hard for kids to not see it unless their parents are like really monitoring their internet use. But like even still, to some extent, like it's because they've been exposed to it, like by content or like porn, or like because it has happened to them. And a lot of times, kids just react what they already know. So a lot of times, they're doing what's been done to them, but they don't have the words for it. So they just like act it out, which then can create other victims because like just because the person that abused you is the same age as you doesn't mean that the impact isn't still the same later.
Mhm.
So that's one thing that I do. I don't always remember that, and usually when I do remember, it's like either in session or somewhere where it's not as impactful. Over like I guess insight, but like that's one thing that I do really like. I wish we talked about more. Like one, the fact that boys do get abused a lot,
Mhm.
sexually abused a lot, and usually their perpetrators are women. Like there are men perpetrators who abuse boys, but there are also a lot of women perpetrators who abuse women and who abuse or girls and who I mean boys, but they also abuse girls. Um, so yeah, and like you said, being mindful of the signs because I'm really big on like autonomy and allowing particularly kids like to have autonomy. So if it's like, hey kid, how are you today? Like Can like, I rarely ask kids for hugs. I'm usually like, hi, waving from a distance, or I'm like, can I have a high five? And if they say no, that's okay, because guess what? They get to say no or yes, because they should have body autonomy. But I think when we force them to always be like, well, that's your grandma, or that's your cousin, or that's your, sister, that also creates bound or issues with boundaries of like, but no, I don't want to hug them today, or no, I don't want to hug them because that's the person to be abusing me when you ain't paying attention. Um, so yeah.
So I think you said something that is very key, especially by highlighting the different dynamics about that body autonomy that children should also have. And I think that in itself is a greater conversation for later to even
Yeah.
bring in some other children in it.
Mhm.
But also, too, one of the newer, I wouldn't even say newer, but you also do see where there are some teenagers or adolescents that also do that towards adults. And so it's so many different dynamics
Mhm.
that are come into play when it comes to sexual trauma. And so I know that we've had great conversation today, and I'm hoping that all the viewers were able to kind of hear what the differences are, learn about some indicators, and hear also that they can get help. But before we kind of wrap it up with like your last pieces of advice on our conversation today, I kind of want to answer this question because people
Okay.
always wonder, do mental health professionals go into mental health because they need to help themselves?
Mhm.
And I think we see that a lot. So, can you talk about kind of like your journey into this work and what did that look like for you?
Mhm. So if we go way back, originally, like, my major in college was pre-pharmacy. Um, 2 years in though, so one thing that has worked against me, school has for the most part come very easy to me, but then it also kind of hindered me in that, like, when it required more work, I was just like, I don't got time for this. I don't want to do this. So a lot of times, like, I didn't put in the extra effort that I should have. So, like, my major was pre-pharmacy. I wanted to be a pharmacist. It got to the point where it was like a whole lot of chemistry, which I wasn't terrible at. I just needed to put in the work, and I just wasn't. Plus, I was going through like a breakup at the time, so I was just like over life, over like everything. So I was like, I ain't got time for this. But failing was not an option, and not graduating was not an option. So then I ended up switching my major to psychology because I in high school I took a psych class and I loved it. Like, that was one of the classes that I could literally read the chapters from beginning to end, be interested in, like, engaging classroom conversations. Because I legit have a short attention span. Like, if what you're talking about not interesting, like, I'm somewhere else in my head. Like, you got this much time to say what you're trying to say, and then I'm done because I
It's
can't be
all of us right
bothered.
now. All of us.
So
Like, what
psychology
did
is
you
one thing. Yeah, psychology is one of the things that, like, was always very intriguing to me. So when I was like, okay, in order to succeed, this needs to be a shift or a pivot. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna major in psychology. I've finished my bachelor's in 2012. I recognized though towards the end of, like, this is a career. I mean, this is a major that, like, if you want to have a career in it, like, you can't stop at bachelor's level. You have to go doctoral or master's level. So I was advised by, thank God, some people around me at the time. And I was like in this little mentor program that strongly advised, like, well, one thing you can do is just like go work in the field, and then decide if you still want to do psychology. And if so, they'll kind of, help you figure out where to go next. So luckily, I took their advice. I ended up working as a research associate at a community mental health agency in Nashville. Um, so with research, because it was mental health research, we were asking like research questions. Like, we had questionnaires. Like, it was the same question every time, real neutral. Like, I'm just asking this question. I just need to respond. We're not processing. We're not doing none of that. But what I learned is that, like, you can't ask people research questions about their trauma and not expect them to give you like a story form and or feel the need to process through their trauma, especially if one, nobody has ever asked them, or they've never had a safe space to talk about that. So I realized, like, oh, okay, people like talking to me. And then I'll never forget, like, one time, it was like an older black man, literally like old enough to be my grandpa. Um, and I asked him look, I just want you to know the difference in
I
age.
heard you, girl.
So I asked him a trauma question, and like he literally, like, he was telling me the story. He was telling me the story and answering my question, but he was literally crying as he was telling me this. So
Mm,
one, I'm like, the fact that you're like literally my grandpa's age, and I'm asking you something that happened about something that happened to you as a child, or adolescent, and like you still have this strong of an emotional response to it, lets me know that you've never dealt with it. And so I think in that moment, I think it was just like God saying, like, I need you. Like, this is what I need you to be doing. Because again, school came very easy for me. Like, psychology was something that is just like, it was very natural to me. So I wasn't having to put a whole lot of effort in it to be good at it. But that was the moment where I realized, like, okay, this ain't about me. Like, my life is bigger than me.
yeah,
In the moment where I really kind of felt like, okay, I'm supposed to be doing this. And
yeah,
like, now I'm just being obedient. Again, luckily it's something that I'm good at and that I enjoy. So it doesn't feel like I'm just, trying to go to heaven, because that's not it. Like, I really do care, and I really do, like, want people to do better, and like heal from stuff that's happened. But honest, like, literally the honest answer is like, I feel like I was called to do it, and I'm
I
just
was
doing
just about to say that. Like,
it. Because I used to think counseling was like stupid. I was like, what do counselors even do? Like, we just sit around and talk about our problems all day?
right.
No, thank you. And then God was like, ha ha, ha.
So you
I'm
know
not
you about to have
this,
to
but
say something
right.
about that. You know you
You know
about to have to
I
say
need to
something
be
about that part.
right.
Like you used to think that counseling was stupid.
Mhm.
Now what won you over?
So, well, honestly, that situation, because it was very humbling, and then like, oh, because I mean, I have stuff about my life and my childhood that I wasn't like particularly like happy about. Like, I
Uh-huh.
got my little T traumas, my little T traumas, but like in the grand scheme of things, I think that was my wake up call for me. Like, girl, them little T traumas. I mean, they're serious. Like, go get your help, but like in this world, it's a lot happening in this world, and like it's people going through real stuff. Um, and I need you, so I need you to yeah, put that on the shelf for a while. So that, I think that's what won me over, like that, just realizing like life is bigger than me. And like I said, I have my issues, but it it don't compare even remotely to like a lot of people's, let alone like a lot of my clients. So humility won me over.
I want to kind of add to it too. Just being another mental health professional and hearing you talk about having an actual experience that won you over. Because I too, with you, is like, what we gonna do? Sit across from each other on a couch and they just gonna hear me? Like, I could do that at home with myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lack of understanding the purpose of going to counseling and getting the support that you need. And I think that when I began to understand that I can't talk to my best friend about everything because there's certain responses in that it's going to just always cater to me changing that immediate feeling or mood I was in. And then
Yeah.
I can't talk to kind of like my elders because their concepts and generation was like totally dependent upon just pray about it. And I was like, okay. So then that brought me to a place, even with my own faith, I was like, I can't just keep praying about it. Like, I need to understand. And so I actually had a mentor when I was getting my bachelor's of social work.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to Malika.
Mm-hmm.
And she basically was like, have you ever thought about why you ended up in this line of work? And so for some people that may not know, there are a couple different ways that you can enter into the mental health field. So Keana came through the psychology way. I came in through the social work way. And so understanding that I had a cousin who I loved to talk to all the time, but when he loved helping and healing and getting people there, but also when he passed away, I needed to find out more about what it is that this field does and what it can do for people. And so I hit a place in getting into the field. I was doing case management, and that's when I realized I was like, okay, case management is not my thing, but hearing the stories and what people are experiencing is my thing. I love that. I love to hear it, and I don't want to interrupt it. I want to find out how can we help this person think through this moment. And for me, that was the light bulb that went off. So I entered into the mental health profession by accident because
Same.
I was a social worker
That's exactly
based on,
right.
okay,
I'm supposed to be a pharmacist. And it's funny because recently I was doing something. I was like, you know what? And I feel like it was just again one of those come to Jesus moments where I was like, I think I could have been a pharmacist, and God would have been okay with that, and I would have been good at it. But I didn't do the work, and so here I am. But I do feel like this just feels a lot more natural, like to me and for me, and a lot more fulfilling. I would assume. But yeah, so that's interesting that you said like there are a lot of ways that we come here. Yeah,
yes.
and
And
it's
what
just
you
not
found,
easy for me. So
listen, that part. And
yeah,
what you found though, that like it's honestly one of those things, because I'm a firm believer that self-awareness is a core competency for mental health professionals. You know, as you get into this field, you're working and learning about several different dynamics that have impacted the person in the environment for such a long time. And so you and I both have to do our work
yeah,
before even being able to work with someone, because we can't be in the middle of a session and having a conversation with somebody and their experiences triggers ours, and then all of a sudden we're trying to provide advice based off of how we wanted to handle
yeah,
a situation. And that's where that difference in being resilient comes in versus having that evidence-based practice that supports, guiding a person through those psychological changes. And I think that's what people have to understand about this profession. This profession is specialized and requires training and additional licenses for a reason. And
yeah.
it's very much so different than just having an everyday conversation with someone, um, at all times. But I also encourage even those that are watching and listening to the information that you provided today to also do some additional reading about the profession, because you have psychologists, you have psychiatrists, you have licensed clinical social workers, you have LPCs, and all of those hold different areas of specialty. So I don't want y'all sitting up here saying that counseling doesn't work and mental health professionals don't work and they don't do anything, because then I'm gonna be like, well, what do you know? You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
right,
Like,
right.
where have you been looking, and who have you been talking to? Um, and so that part. But I'm gonna kind of shift it kind of back to you, because I also want you to kind of share, some last piece of advice that you want, those that are watching right now to kind of be mindful of, because we shared a lot today.
Yeah.
I want to kind of pull it together for so that they can be guided towards the help that they need.
Yeah. Honestly, to put it shortly, I would say just like take your pain and the things that have happened to you seriously. Because like I can't tell you how many times in sessions, because I'm directive if it's like obviously a safety concern, or something that's like, okay, pause, like we need to address this. It doesn't happen often, but I'm okay with doing that if necessary. But most of the time I'm just like the passenger in the passenger seat, metaphorically, like following the client's story, tracking what's happening, responding when necessary. Um, but I'm not really involved. I'm just more so like holding space for them and like obviously creating safeties, maintaining safeties, that kind of thing. But I would say take your pain seriously, because I can't tell you how many times in sessions a person is like essentially given a trauma narrative that they don't even realize is a trauma narrative, and I'm like, you do realize that that was sexual abuse, right? And like you do realize that that was abuse, or your parent just like being hard on you and like calling you names. That's verbal abuse. You do realize that. Um, and them either a lot of times being like, but is it though? Or just like, oh, you know what? You're right. I never even considered that. Um, So really taking the things that have happened to you and your pain seriously, because it probably is serious. It's just that if you have people around you that don't allow for you to have those thoughts or feelings or emotions, then you think it's not important, but it is. So and then that kind of takes you into like consider therapy. And it may not be the option for you right now. It may not be the option for you ever, but I just ask that you consider it. And I think like you mentioned too, like just think about it, like do more research, consider it as an option because it's a lot of stuff in this world that we have to figure out on our own, and like healing ain't one of them, fortunately. But you also have to do your part in like looking for that help. So
I think too, because you have dual roles. So you are a counselor, right? A mental health counselor, but you also do life coaching. And
yeah.
I think this is a great time to talk about that difference really quick so
Okay.
that they know, like, when you're seeking help,
Mhm.
making sure you are actually seeking help from the right profession.
Yeah. So I make it very clear, like with coaching clients, like, hey, I'm a therapist, and so I will have some of those skills, but this is not counseling because the way that I differentiate the two is like counseling is very process based, and I was trained as a clinical mental health counselor, so like I was trained to diagnose and treat mental illnesses, like that was pretty much my entire program. So I could do that, but that's not what I'm doing in coaching. So counseling is more process like, okay, what symptoms are you dealing with? What label are we going to put on it to be able to better manage it and then know how to effectively treat it. And that could be 6 months, a year, a couple years, like that time can vary. But the key is that it's going to be a process. It's not going to be like a hey, do this and then it's going to take some time. Coaching is more so like I have a problem. This is the problem. These are the goals that I need to accomplish to fix the problem, and that's it. Like it's a lot. You're usually not in coaching for like a year or multiple years. Like it's usually this is the problem. This is what we're going to do to fix the problem, and then the problem is fixed. So it's a lot more goal oriented and short term focused.
So throw us a example of what someone will come to you for in regards to life coaching. Because in a minute you're going to say where to find you,
Yeah.
and I want to make sure that they have some examples of what a person would actually do life coaching for.
Yes. So people that are genuinely just like, I'm not happy with my life. I want to do something better. Or particularly like I have experienced a lot of things in my life that I just never dealt with. Now, a lot of times I'm referring them out to counseling, but in my initial consultation, I will see like, is this something that they just need to acknowledge? Like, yes, these things happen and I'm ready to move on. Because sometimes that's the thing. Like, people have decided that they are like they've handled it the way that they need to. They just want to move forward. Because, like I mentioned, trauma is very pervasive. So sometimes the reason that they don't have the degree that they want, or they don't have the family that they want, or the relationship that they want, is because they don't have the skills to like sustain those things. Well, one to even get them to begin with, but then not to like sustain them. So sometimes the goals can be like, okay, well, um, let's get you being more social. Like, where do you go for fun? Like, what? Like, who do you talk to? Like, what does your self care look like? So that to me would be more coaching. Whereas if they're like, I have this trauma that's impacting my relationships, that I haven't dealt with the trauma and I don't even know how it's impacted my relationship, that's going to be counseling because we got to process through that and figure it
Mhm.
out. So yeah, that's how I separate the two.
And I think you do a great job at separating those and making sure that you do your work. You're very knowledgeable about the mental health profession. You are also knowledgeable about the person in the environment, and I think that that's very important because what I'm also seeing and learning is that we have to help people make decisions about life so that they don't feel stuck, so that
Mhm.
they can feel fulfilled and know that they are actually on the right path. There are a lot of people who are just immediately, because of their trauma, forced into survival. And then, it's just an ongoing cycle of trying to keep up, and that they never even took a break. And then you add a family dynamic in there, and then you add marriage in there, and then you add moving, and
Yeah.
then divorce or loss of a loved one, grief. And that kind of gives you an idea how something that a small t can become a very
Oh,
big T,
definitely.
really 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 fast. And so that's why we ask that you all consider counseling, and consider also life coaching, which can help you with maybe a strategy or develop a skill set that is more in the moment. But life coaching also can be seen as a support and sustaining and maintaining component. And
Mm.
so I really appreciate your time here
No
today in this
problem.
conversation. I'm hoping that the viewers also get get some more information. I know it's surface,
Mhm.
but I also want the viewers to know that this is serious work.
Oh, definitely.
You are serious. You're a serious thing. Like uh,
Yeah, your
life,
life is serious.
life,
And
life
the
is
quality of your life, like the quality of your life is very important. Like,
very. And if you are facing like moments that do make you feel horrible about life, and you're having a hard time with constant interruptions, in your psychological state regarding life, then those are indicators that you may need a little bit more support and processing. So, can you let us know, Ms. Keana, where we can find you, your website information, and
yeah. So my website is www.thequeenguidecoaching. So that's TheQueenGuidecoaching.com. And on there, I have resources for like the difference between coaching and counseling. I have mental health resources. I have a list of events that I've attended or like conversations that I've had about mental health. And I have my services also. Thank you for that. One of the services that you will see is like during the pandemic, I started doing what I call mental health check-ins. One, that's a free service. It's technically donation based, so like if you wanted to pay for or like donate, like you could, but it's not like there's no payment required for you to schedule it, and there's no payment required for that service. So definitely take advantage of that if you're like I don't even know where to start and I don't even know what I need. That could be a good one. If you know you need something but aren't sure what, that I also have a consulting service on there as well. I think technically that one right now doesn't have a price attached to it, but by Friday it will. So if you're watching this today, get on there. So yeah, and then always you can just email me like, hey, I'm struggling. Could you help me out? Because I'm always here for like helping people figure out what they need. Because a lot of times we don't know. We don't talk about mental health enough in our community to like even know like one what a service even is for it, but then like how to access it. So I'm always here for like helping people figure out what they need and figure out how to get what they need. So
yes. So thank you so much for your time.
no, thank you for having me. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope that you all visit thequeenguidecoaching.com to learn more about Keana's services, and also to just learn more about the difference between mental health services and coaching. I know she provides great detail on her website, so make sure you check it out by Friday. And until next time, we have ended and concluded another Ask Christian session. Remember my three C's: to connect with yourself authentically, to commit to your own self-care, balancing your own life and taking care of your own business, and to consistently do it at a pace that works for you. You can learn more about My Secret's Purpose conference at www.mysecretspurpose.com. Thank you so much for tuning in today.